Hello, Realtors. Welcome to the Legal Podcast. This is a deep dive into the SCR exclusive right to sell agreement, the listing agreement, SCR 220. If you're interested in the short walkthrough, see Tara Pitts' video. Mike and Tyler are here in the production. We got a special guest star, Reah Smith. Reah, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Byron. I'm glad to be here. Realtor members, I'm a former president of your association. I was serving during the year 2024, which is when we had all those big significant NAR changes through the settlement agreement. I'm also now a real estate instructor. It was kind of a natural progression from my roles in leadership and working and speaking with members about changes in forms and dynamics of the marketplace that I decided it was time to step up and become a real estate instructor for the state of South Carolina. And I'm also your 2025 Realtor of the Year.
Fantastic. Thanks for your service. So we've done a short walkthrough with the lawyers. Tara and I have done it. This one, what I'm excited about is we get a practitioner's point of view and an instructor's point of view. So I kind of, when you're teaching the exclusive right, this is the big change, right? So we've looked at the kind of the tea leaves. We looked at other states. A majority of the states are moving to go away from broker to broker compensation. Mm-hmm. We did a risk management survey of our risks, and our antitrust lawyers said, hey, one risk that you've got out there, because the United States Department of Justice and the trial lawyers, is firm to firm, broker to broker compensation. So in the SCR forms, we moved away from that. That's a big change for the practitioners, which is why they're probably watching this video. And so when we're instructing this, when you first start teaching this, what do you focus on at first when you're teaching the listing agreement?
Well, the first thing I like to tell members that are going to sit in anybody's classroom, not just mine, but any opportunity to learn about forms, go to the website and pull the form up simultaneously, which is what you should do now, is go pull that form up on screaltors.org/forms and find 220 so you can follow along with me as I'm explaining what these changes are. And these are significant changes. This isn't just like a tweak here or there. This is very significant changes to the way that we do business in the state of South Carolina with real estate if you are using the SCR forms, which I hope that you are. The major change, and it's change that I was blessed to be able to sit at the table with the leaders and decision makers at the time as they came through this change through Forms Committee and Executive Committee and the Board of Directors. This change was brought about for your protection, to reduce your risk as we are observing the changes in the marketplace and the ways in which that we may leave ourselves open to pitfalls and to legal quagmires. Broker to broker compensation, which is illegal, as in it is statutorily allowed as a business model, broker to broker compensation. We decided as forward-thinking leaders looking out for your best interests that it was time to shift away from that model. That model of real estate worked extremely well for eons, right? And it worked well because prior to August of 2024, offers of compensation were posted available for members of an MLS to see what that fee for service being offered actually was. They were able to see that up front, and the settlement requirements now require that every MLS, realtor-owned MLS, remove that information, remove that fee for service from the MLS. We know that from the changes that took place in August of 2024. Well, what happened when we did that? The golden railway that cooperative compensation displayed through the MLS provided, that open disclosure went away. Everything sort of moved behind the curtain, if you will, in terms of compensation for buyer agents, what those amounts may or may not be. The entire system as we knew it stopped functioning well. In the seller direct model, this opportunity now exists to have a decoupled transaction, if you will, which the Department of Justice describes to us as being important, to have a decoupled transaction where the seller fees, the listing for fees for service are set up front, Buyer agency fees are set up front, and then the negotiation of the obligations of those fees and how they're going to be paid are put as terms of the contract for sale to close. Byron, do you want to kind of touch on anything about the DOJ and kind of how they've looked at this listing process and why we came to this decision around moving into this seller direct model versus the broker to broker way that we had done for many years?
Yeah, kind of the key words I always hear when I read articles about what you're describing is transparency and negotiation. So the idea is you're talking about behind the curtain. This is moving it all in front of the curtain. You'll have, like you said, the buyer will sign a buyer agency agreement. We'll have the compensation. The seller that we're going to go through here signs this agreement. And then they make a deal. So the buyer can use the offer to ask for seller concessions either through seller paid buyer transaction cost or attaching the seller to buyer broker compensation agreement 120. And that way everybody's seeing their nets and they're figuring out for the seller what their net, buyer's looking at their sheet, how much money they got to bring to the table, how much they can get a loan for, how much is it going to appraise. And the center of all that is the real estate agents, the realtors that are organizing this. So
that's right. And with when we were in the world of broker to broker compensation, I don't think our members, our realtor members that were members of realtor owned MLSs recognized that when that fee, that buyer agency fee was posted in the MLS, that was contractually obligated. It was contractually set that members of that MLS had already agreed to cooperate and compensate at that posted fee for service. When we lost that ability to do so, there was no guarantee of fee for service upfront. Every single deal, every single negotiation is individualized. What can be determined in the terms to work for both buyer and seller to get to the closing table, that blanket guarantee went away, and then an individual strategy was employed for each individual transaction. Now, why is that? A lot of course, the knee jerk is this is bad. This disrupts the way we do business. That was what I heard a lot as president in 2024 was, how did this happen? How could you let this happen? All these things. Let that go because it did happen. And it's over with. And now we are at 2026 practicing in this new arena. It's good because it gives you another tool of negotiation that you have in your toolbox, independent of who you represent. When we had one set point of the contract already figured out, it was already set. Now you have the ability to put together more unique deals. I'm putting together very unique deals now that fee for service has to be figured out. The way I describe it in my new course, Strategies for Seller Direct Transactions, is the old way, broker to broker way, is the pie, right? We have the listing agreement is a big pie, and the firm has offered some slice of pie of some variety to all the buyer agents of their MLS. Pie's over. Now we're all making our own cupcakes at whatever flavor and toppings that you prefer within your individual agency agreements. The listing agreement is its cupcake. The buyer agreement is its cupcake. And if you're going to close on the bakery, you got to figure out how to get both those cupcakes under the roof of that bakery, if that makes sense from a rudimentary analogy there. That's the main changes here to this listing agreement, though, is there is no full pie amount where you've offered a portion to buyer agents. The way, and we'll get into, I won't jump too far ahead, but we'll get into the details about the way those fees are presented in this form, but the fee for service is your listing fee for service. If you are a listing agent, that's what this fee is. This, Mr. Seller, at a rate of X is what I charge for the fees for service that I provide to list your home. And new, ding, 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 that is not something that we have had before is number 6 on the bottom of page 2, additional compensation for assisting an unrepresented buyer. I'll let us get into the details on that in just a minute, but that's where I'm seeing personally practitioner, instructor, boots on the ground. This is a confusion point for many licensees who they don't understand what to do with that field, how to fill it out, how to figure out how to fill it out. And they're also not understanding what happens in dual agency, where if we use the same analogy of a listing pie with broker to broker, buyer agency generally was covered, a dual agency buyer situation was generally covered in that pie. Well, now everybody's baked their own cupcake. And so how do I fit my buyers that I have under buyer agency agreement? How do I fit them into the equation of this now listing client that I'm taking on at this fee for service? So we'll kind of get into those details, but that's the 30,000 foot. Here's what's changed. Here's what's different. And this is decidedly different, but it's not new. Many firms out across the nation really saw the writing on the wall early in 2024 that the broker-to-broker model was going to be very challenging to continue to execute without guaranteed cooperation and compensation through the MLS. They early adopted seller direct, so many of our members out there across South Carolina have already interacted in these type of listing agreement situations and have represented buyers where the seller has made direct compensation. And I'll kind of cover with y'all what I feel like some of the pitfalls are of explaining this new compensation setup to members of the public that are hiring you to be their listing agent or buyer agent.
Yeah, I like that analogy because
we love analogies, don't we? Yeah. We get way into the food analogies too.
Yeah, it's lunchtime, and then
it is lunchtime.
Because the hotline gets a lot of that unrepresented buyer too. Because I like you're talking about that pie. You're no longer carving up the pie and giving slices away. Everybody's got a cupcake. Well, there was no cupcake for the unrepresented buyer, so we had to
now
create a cupcake.
Now we have a created cupcake, and if the closing statement is the bakery, you got to figure out how each cupcake is going to fit under the roof of that bakery to get you to closing table.
Super. Yeah, let's do a deep dive and pretend I'm a seller.
Awesome.
I'm up there in your market, Lake Kiwi, and we're going through this kind of show me how you as a practitioner deal with this. So we'll just start at, I guess, page 1, section 1.
Yeah, we're at the top of page 1. If you're following along at home, the most important thing that I'm going to say is the important first sentence of this agreement is, in considerations of the covenants, herein contains sole property owners blank. Well, who is that? It's whoever's on the deed. That is a sticky point for the Real Estate Commission. If you have signed an agreement with someone that is not the listed on the deed owner party, you do not have an agreement. If you have signed an agreement with only one party of the deed, we'll say a husband and wife, and only the wife signed, but the husband has not signed, you don't have an agreement. If you are visited by the inspectors of the Real Estate Commission, in which we all will be visited, that is on their charge list of work to be done is to get to every brokerage over the next 3-year window of time. My firm's already been visited, and I learned quite a bit in the inspection process of our forms. They're going to want to see that the person on the deed matches that name. And an easy way to do that is to throw that deed in your file. Compliance officers for large firms that are checking to make sure file compliance is in place, put that on your check sheet that the signing party is the actual owner of that property. And if they are making these purchase or selling decisions, if you don't have the right party here, then agreement you do not have. And you're out of compliance with license law. You're illegally marketing a property for sale that you do not have express written permission to do so if you don't have that party. That's an important piece. If you've listened to one thing to me today, that's what I want you to hear. Section 1, very simple. What are we selling? What is your property? As much detail as possible here. You want to make sure that tax map number is correct. You want to make sure that the address is filled out correctly. I think probably where this can be challenging is when you are selling land that's not in a subdivision, that's not been subdivided. Make sure you have this expressed correctly so that you have that full agreement. You have an enforceable agreement for the right thing. All this diligence is super important. Length of agreement. This is a lot of fun to talk about. That's section 2, and it reads, the agreement will begin on X date and automatically end at 11:59, time firm on blank Y date. So, Byron, I'm going to kick this back to you as we think about clear cooperation and what the rules are for when this start date says it is and when they need to have it into the multiple listing service. You want to detail on that real quick?
Yeah, what I say on the hotline, you know, because sometimes you might have somebody that's they're going on a cruise, a trip, what have you, and they need to sign early, but you still need to comply with your MLS rules and public marketing and clear cooperation. And they have D-mail in the MLS, so it depends on the MLS. But call the hotline on this one because the rules might not be the same in different multiple listing services. But a light bulb came on to me when you were talking about that first line, because I was thinking like, oh, I'm the seller, I know who I am. But you touched on some things that just, you know, like it was almost hotline. Wholesaling, that's regulated now, so you got to make sure you're not dealing with a wholesaler and the fake seller. You might be getting somebody out of the blue calls you, probably emails you, hey, I want to sell this land. And you can use the member benefit forewarn. And when you're getting these names, the deeds, the property, what are some tools you use in your practice? Do you go to the courthouse
certainly
electronically? Or?
Well, and certainly for verifying the owner of the property, we have to be diligent now because it's easier than ever to be scammed in a situation. And if you're eager and urgent to put a deal together, you may not be as diligent as you would like to be. Oftentimes through third-party syndicated sites like Zillow, Realtor.com, Trulia, go down the list of them. A lot of times I will receive leads, listing leads for these land scam situations where, and they all basically read the same. Hey, I have a piece of property at the cliffs at Kiwi Falls South. I'm ready to get listed, and call me back or email me back. A lot of times they won't talk to you, but email me if you're interested. And I usually know that's the start of a land scam. But basically looking at the name and forewarning the number and seeing does it match the deed that's on file in the courthouse in the county in which that community is in, I can at least start that verification process. If they won't get on the phone with me, if they won't get on Zoom with me, also, if they want to set up a Zoom, but they send you the Zoom link, nah. You as the licensed competent professional set up the Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, whatever that service is, you set that link up and send it out. Why am I saying that? Because scammers will set up a Zoom link for you and use that as a portal in to collect your information. I'm sure Mike, who's in the studio right now, has some more detailed information on that. That's something that's happened to me recently where they refused to click my Zoom link. No, I need you to use mine. Well, what for? So, and it's so that they can facilitate whatever their in-game scam is. So you've got to verify those things. The other cool part of it is, as an enterprising associated licensee, we no longer are called salesperson in the License Law, your 2024 update, moved your titling over to associated licensee. But as someone who's facilitating real estate transactions, that's an opportunity for me now. I've went to the trouble of looking up who does own that property. Reach out to them and say, hey, I want to let you know that we don't know who it is, but there's land scams everywhere. I've caught this in my own lead generation that they were trying to sell your property. I'm just giving you some awareness. Start a dialogue. It makes you part of your commiserate experience as a licensed competent professional that you're willing to reach out to the public and let them know those things. They may remember you when it is time to list, or shoot, it may be time to list that day. So that's just like a little side tip of what to do when you're dealing with that. But if you don't verify that you have the right person, and we oftentimes take that for granted that you've got the right person. If you don't verify that, then you failed on your duty.
Yeah, good points. Definitely. The scams are happening all across the country, and I've not heard a silver bullet. So educating like we're doing now,
Correct.
And then using those steps you said are the best defenses we've got right now. The length of the agreement, the one thing we hear at the Real Estate Commission is, hey, you can't be advertising this thing when you don't have an active listing agreement. So whatever date you put in that first one, that's an important first date.
Well, and I see folks mess that up. And I, it's not, I'm not able to know that for sure as someone who's just cruising social media, but I see a lot of licensees, because I'm friends with a lot of y'all on there. I see you marketing property that I question, do you have the listing agreement in place? You better have the listing agreement in place. If it's not in the MLS, that's my first clue that you don't have the listing agreement in place. And you may have an office exclusive agreement signed, and we'll get to that in that section of this, this form. But office exclusive, I get asked a lot, what does that mean? My gosh, it's defined in the title. It is exclusive to your office. It doesn't mean exclusive to your office plus all your friends on Facebook. It doesn't mean exclusive to your office plus this closed real estate group of just a few licensees from the greater KOE market. It means exclusive. And what does that office exclusive look like? If you've watched the video with where I'm talking about dual agency, designated agency, and using the hand as the symbol of the firm, BIC in the middle, licensees as the finger, if it's not in the hand, then you've lost the office exclusive positioning and you're running afoul of MLS rules. If you don't have a written agreement and you're marketing property, then you've run afoul of 4057, which is your license law. To be in compliance and to continue to practice until they put the Jesus called wreath on your grave, you better be in compliance with these, with all of the rules that are required of you as the licensed competent professional, including 4057, including ethics, including MLS rules.
Super, yeah, well said. And section 3, we've done a video on the agency, the real estate brokerage relationship form. So this is where it documents that they've gotten that and they've received a copy.
And this is a perfect opportunity. We do have another video out there that you can preview about buyer agency. This is a duplication almost of that same, what would be section 5 in the buyer agency agreement is section 3 in the listing agreement. This is your opportunity to make sure to double down on that meaningful discussion on agency and to talk about the dual and designated situation in as much substantive or as much meaningful discussion as you can have on it. This is also the moment that I think it's best to start saying to your seller, now, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, you recognize that there are relationships that exist in real estate. We're going to be in one exclusive with my listing agreement. Buyer agency agreements work the same way for buyers and their representation, and start that dialogue of helping them understand that buyers have their own agency agreement that is a contract that they're going to sign, just like this listing agreement is a contract. And we'll dig further in on what I mean with talking through the contractual obligation, but you've got to help a seller understand holistically the pieces of the purchase puzzle as they come together. And part of that purchase puzzle, 88% of the time, according to the NAR 2025 Home Buyers and Sellers Survey, 88% of the time, that puzzle purchase piece will come together with representation for a buyer. Great opportunity to cover that in section 3.
Yeah, great. And like, I know your brokerage, you handle seller clients and buyer clients. So explaining to the seller, hey, here's what happens if my brokerage has the buyer client.
Right.
We may have to go into dual agency if my brokerage offers it. We may even have designated agency, which allows me to, in certain situations, to be able to give more professional advocacy for you, almost like single agency.
That's right. And you want your seller to understand that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, when you are listing with me at Lake QE Real Estate, understand we generate a tremendous number of lake buyers through our firm, as that is our key marketing goal, is to service this specific real estate property. I would like for you to consider the opportunity that either myself or my broker in charge or another member of my firm may be bringing to you a buyer that's under contractual obligation. We'll know that up front, and I'm only asking that you consider it and know that if we do come into a situation where a preferable offer is brought or any offer is brought to you from one of these special relationships, myself, broker or another licensee of my firm, then there will be a subsequent agreement that follows, either dual or designated, depending on the situation. And more times than not, a seller is going to say, I want as many eyeballs as I can get on my home. I want as many engaged, excited, qualified buyers that can come out and see my home so that I may net the best position, the most appropriate net that I can get in these market conditions and the conditions of my home.
Super. Yeah, it's a good segue into 4, listing price. What are some tools you use when you're, say I'm the seller, when you're trying to calculate a good market price for me in Section 4? What are some tools that the listing agent can use?
Well, I like that you use the word tool for listing price. We have to explain to our sellers that listing price, contract price, terms, those are all tools of the transaction. Listing price being a tool of the listing portion of the transaction, contract price being the portion, of the actual purchase of the transaction. This is a great point to start introducing the idea of net proceeds being the only money that materializes into check form or wire form to hit their bank account. The listing price, Mr. Seller, is a tool for us to try and meet the most appropriate net for the market conditions that we are practicing in and for the conditions of your home. So when we select this price, we need to keep some things in mind. We need to list in a place that we feel like we can hook a buyer that will perform for you all the way to closing. We need to list in the mindset that it will meet appraised value based on the comparable data that I have available to me through our MLS sold comparable data, through tax sales data, all the data points that I have to say that the value point is this. And we need to list this price in the mindset that 88% of the time, the buyer coming to you is going to need access to the money they bring to the transaction to compensate their representation. So we need that listing price to hit the Goldilocks spot of just right on those 3 things, and maybe even to a point where we've planned some level of reduction if we're looking at what our margin may or may not be. Mr. Seller, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you there are things that you're going to have to account for. And some of those things are appraised value, and some of those things are what you need to satisfy your the mortgage that you have. There are certain needs of the transaction, and you need to be prepared that more times than not, a buyer is going to need access to that money to cover their representation. They can only get that access through you, Mr. Seller. They can only do it that way because the one pot of money that's coming to the table to solve everybody's obligations, no problems in real estate, just obligations on each side. The one pot of money comes with strings attached more times than not through federal financing requirements. They cannot take their pot of money and pull out a segment to pay and make whole their representation in the transaction. They need you to say yes. I hear a lot of times from sellers and from listing agents that represent sellers, this is the common objection, is I don't want to pay. I don't want to pay. I don't want to pay. When they're signing this document, nobody's paying anything. They're obligating themselves to the fee that's owed for your services. Nobody pays anything till the money shows up at the closing table. So, Mr. Seller, just like you need that buyer's fees or funds to cover my fee for service, that buyer needs it as well. Just like you need that buyer's funds to cover your portion of the tax bill paid in arrears in South Carolina, the buyers need access to cover their representation. Bring it back each time. If you cannot satisfy your mortgage today and you need the funds that the buyer brings to the table, they need access to that funding as well. Our sellers get in a mindset of point of sale retail. I buy thing, give you money. Well, that's not a real estate transaction. Real estate is a layered legal obligation of a purchase that is not point of sale. It's bring the one pot of money and we divvy it all up. I use the analogy of the jigsaw puzzle. If that pot of money is a jigsaw puzzle and we've got to put the puzzle together to where it forms a settlement statement, Mr. Seller, the important thing to know, the only thing that materializes into a check at the end is at the bottom of page 1 of the settlement statement that says seller net proceeds, cash to seller, however your closing attorney writes it. Everything else is tools of the transaction, is tools of negotiation. This list price is one of those tools. Purchase price is another of those tools. So as we set this price together and we agree upon this price together, because you do have to agree on it, we need a price with those considerations in mind.
Super. And how do you interview a seller when you're trying to find out stuff that maybe the seller doesn't even want to tell you, like they're getting a divorce, they need the money to buy, all these different things that can impact the seller's motivations. How do you pull that out of the seller when you're talking to them?
If they're withholding information, I can tell that would be important in their transaction. Number one, I hope that I've done a meaningful explanation on the disclosure of brokerage relationships around limited confidentiality and confidentiality in general. And I take that time to remind them, hey, what you tell me is confidential, and it is confidential forever. That's what the limited confidentiality point of 4057 says, is that limited confidentiality rides along. I can't ever use this to harm you, Mr. Seller. I can only use this as information to help facilitate your best outcome. So if you need this to settle an outstanding tax debt or something, or you've got some lien attached to your property, or there's a service provider that filed a mechanics lien of $15,000 and we need to figure that. I need to know that so I can help put the purchase puzzle together and we get the listing price correct at the point it needs to be at. I think the question of, if they're not willing to work with you, you're going to struggle. And this is a two-way agreement. You agree to work with them, they agree to work with you. And a lot of times when it comes down to this listing price, if the seller will not take my advice on what market value says via the comparable data, if they will not make changes that are required to get their home sold, if they cannot meet these expectations, then they're probably better served by a different real estate professional. I intend to list property so that it sells. I don't intend to list property so it looks good on Facebook. I want them to sell. So if they've got to follow and trust my advice, and if they don't, then we're not generally going to be a fit. And unfortunately, and I'm not right all the time, gracious knows, but unfortunately, that type of seller does tend to struggle through the sales process. And a lot of times it's because market conditions are not going to meet their expectations.
Super. And then in your classes, when you're teaching this, we've talked about this before, you want the listing agent to have their own presentation, their own scripts, and their own words and practice, right?
Yeah, you hear a lot, if you've been watching these videos, these words tumble out of my mouth and have been written down nowhere. They're authentic to me, and I advise that each member that watches these videos really soak in and understand what I'm explaining, and then find your words, find your way to talk about this. I advise many times in the town halls in 2024, find your brokerage buddy, not the buddy from down the road across the street at firm, not yours. Find your brokerage buddy in this hand and run scripts together. And why do I say that? Because you have the same broker in charge, you have the same office policy, and you're not colluding to set some type of different rate for a consumer. You're safe here to do this. You're also safe to take out your friends and family for coffee, for a cocktail, or what have you, and say, hey, do you mind me running some of this by you and see if it makes sense and clicks to you and understands? It's an opportunity to showcase to your friends and family what type of trained professional you are and how good you are at what you do, and they'll give you the honest feedback of, no, I don't understand this, or I am following what you're saying. They'll remember you when it's time to send out referrals. That's important stuff to be able to show off what you do. So practice it.
Exactly. And then the most important change that we made in this SCR 220, and the one we get the hotline calls about, and probably the ones they ask about in your class, is Section 5, listing broker compensation. We've touched on it, but what do you
Sure.
say in your classes when you get to this portion of the form?
Well, one thing, and it's not a criticism, but it's something we have to logistically look at as we are presenting in paper this form. Section 5 is at the very bottom of page 1, and then the meat of it is at the top of page 2. If I'm presenting this in person, and oftentimes I am for a listing, it just depends on what we're listing. I tend to, just like, and I'll show the class here, I tend to present it like this so they see it all in long form together, because it's something about the mentality of going from here to here can be confusing to them. But the way that I present this listing broker compensation, this is my fee, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, to market and list your home from listing services. That at Lake Huey Real Estate, our fee for service, for me to be your dedicated listing agent, our fee for service is X. So X goes in exactly blank with dollar amount or percentage amount, whichever it is that I am working for. And it has to, just like with the buyer agency agreement, it has to be exact. So that is where that fee goes. And I take, it explains, what does this explain? Or what does this cover in the big boilerplate paragraph afterwards? But I explain to them, what does that really mean for listing services for me? What are you really getting out of me? What am I offering? Is it photography? Is it drones? Is it a media video package? Is it social media content that is a big production and a schedule? What does the advertising look like? This is what this fee is covering on the base level. That's really base level, because what I am valued at and what I am worth is my knowledge base. I'm being compensated because I am knowledgeable about Lake Huey. I understand the specific nuances of property ownership and what they need to be prepared for to communicate to buyers out in the marketplace, what they need to be looking out for in an offer to purchase from buyers that may be a pitfall or a situation for them. I know and understand your market. I service the buyers in this market, and I am prepared to help you through as an advocate to run this transaction to closing from this side of the table, from the listing side of the table. And my commitment to you is to always negotiate for the most important or the most appropriate net proceeds for the conditions of the market we're in right now today and the conditions of your home. And why do I say it that way? You will rarely, now I got a boat named Highest and Best, and it's called that because I had to buy it to get a deal to close. But I don't use the term highest and best for really anything, because highest and best in my mind like creates like a fairy tale situation where we're getting the highest and the best. You're going to get, independent of that, you're going to get what the most appropriate highest number is for your market conditions and the most appropriate highest number for the conditions of your home. If you have a tree through the center of your roof, that's the conditions of your home is going to affect your most appropriate net. I'm going to advise you on how to receive the most appropriate net for these market conditions, and I'm going to negotiate and advocate on your behalf to get that most appropriate net. And something that we need to plan and prepare for, Mr. Seller, is that the qualified buyers who are looking at your home are looking with representation. So we need to be prepared for those buyers to ask for the fees for their representation be taken from the proceeds, using the money that they're bringing to the table to be taken from those proceeds to compensate that representation. This is an advantage to you, Mr. Seller. It is new in that we used to set this number up front and it was guaranteed through the MLS. I say it just like this. We have had changes in the industry. I don't say we are working under a settlement agreement that was entered by our national. Seller don't care. They don't even really know what that means. I say we have changes of our industry that we now list property in this way. So whereas before, Mr. Seller, where we may have taken a pie and offered a portion of a pie guaranteed through the MLS to all the buyer agents in the MLS, that's gone away. What we do now is we make plans and we prepare for what that fee could be. That fee could be X, it could be less than X, it could be more than X. You have a range in mind, and we have a listing price that we've set in mind of that range of what we may be asked to cover for compensation. Mr. Seller, I will always advise you in what is your best interest. And it is your best interest if a buyer who has a contractual obligation to their representation asks for that fee to be covered, it is in your advantage that you consider it. And if the considerations meet the net proceeds, which is the only money going to the bank, then I want you to consider making that a term of the contract. The good news is it's individual to each offer we receive. And the great news is we don't throw out what you are willing to do up front. That's confidential information to you, Mr. Seller. While you may be willing to compensate X, you may be willing to compensate less than X or more than X. I'm going to hold that confidential and let the buyer agents tell us what the buyer has agreed and been obligated to their fee for service. I'm going to let them tell us so that then we know how to negotiate appropriately back to them. Unless they give us an acceptable offer with all terms that work on the first go, we have the tools now to negotiate back to them on exactly where we need to be contract price-wise or any other favorable term that meets your goals. We've got more flexibility in this transaction now, Mr. Seller, but what I want you to understand and what I want you to be prepared for is the idea that a buyer agent's not going to need compensation or that buyers are going to find money from other buckets and pots of money other places. That is not the reality of the marketplace. Buyers have limited cash funds to make their transactions. They've set aside for down payment. If they are working a 95 to 100% financing, there is no cash. The little cash that they have set to the side, they've got to pay a home inspector, they've got to pay for the appraisal, they've got to pay for a laundry list of due diligence items that will take away every bit of available cash, and there is nowhere else for them to pull it from. And if they can't compensate their representation, then they can't make the purchase. The money don't show up till the end. We're just putting the puzzle pieces together. The money shows up at the end, and the only money that's going to go with you is seller net proceeds. That's like the 30,000 foot on what to expect and what to prepare for. I'm worried and concerned that listing agents are presenting this form without that second part that I just gave of what do you need to expect, Mr. Seller, in terms of represented buyers coming to their transaction. They're putting their fee for service at whatever it is and leaving it at that, and then they'll figure it out when it happens. Don't wait to figure it out. Give them a level set expectation of this could happen this way. We should be prepared for that. Either way, we're going to get you your best net. That you've got to give them an idea of what's going to happen and get out of their heads of, I won't pay. There isn't any money until it comes from the buyer. Unless, and the way I throw it back is, now if I were to collect my fee for my listing services today, would you want to write me a check, pull out cash, and pay me today? Or would you prefer that my fee for service be taken from that same buyer proceeds that's coming to solve everybody's obligations? Take it to the next transaction. Mr. Seller, you're selling this home, but you're buying a home in Greenville. Would you like to have access to the funds that you bring to the table for that buyer agent, for you to be able to pay that obligation through those funds? Take them holistic. They're in the driver's seat, seeing it this way. You got to bring them up 30,000 feet. Let them see the whole jigsaw puzzle as it comes together to look like a settlement statement.
Well said, definitely. So you set the fee there in Section 5. And then we've got this administrative fee. Let's talk about administrative fees because some business models use administrative fees. Some
sure. If you're charging any fees, they must be expressed in writing and agreed upon. So if your fee for service for a listing home is X, and you also have some level of administrative fee that you're charging, your firm charges, what have you, that's disclosed here and agreed upon here in this additional fee section. You can't assess it at the end. You can't assess it out of the blue. It has to be taken here. This is exactly just like it is in the buyer agency agreement, and it describes how that fee will be treated. You got one option. Is it just due? Is it credited or is it not credited? You have all the options there. If you're going to charge a fee for anything, it has got to be on this agreement.
Well said. Then Section 6 is what surprised me, because when we were doing these forms, I always thought there'd be a lot of pushback about the decoupling, about no longer having the co-op in the listing fee. But what agents have been focusing on in my classes and the hotlines, and probably in your situation too, this unrepresented buyer. And what do you think the disconnect is with realtors when they're reading this Section 6 that confuses them?
Well, if I'm being frank, many licensees don't understand the difference between a client and a customer, so we'll start there. This was important to Forms Committee that we have this Section 6. This is brand new for you guys, brand new stuff. Section 6 for the unrepresented buyer. This is the situation where I'm the listing agent. I've got my sign in the yard, the listing on the MLS, and my fee for service at X for my listing services. And then a buying member of the public drove by my house and saw a sign or my phone number, called me up. This means phone now. I'm old. So call you up and ask, I want to see your home that you have listed. I'm not working with any buyer. Will you take me in to see it? This gives you the option to be compensated for facilitating that transaction for an unrepresented buyer. Same thing, they find you on realtor.com, LakeKiwiRealEstate.com, whatever, call you, and your duty is to show them this house as a duty of your listing agreement. But there's workload involved in taking a customer through closing. They're unrepresented. They don't have another party, another licensed competent professional in the transaction guiding them through. So there is value to that work. We talked earlier in the day offline about how transaction services and client level services, we've been had the ability to have transaction brokers since the year 2017 in that license law revision. It was new for South Carolina. It's been around for closing in on a decade now, but I think there's some prevailing mindset that because you're in customer service, that is a less than, in the way of it being less work, less obligation. There may be less risk, and you're not receiving the full client level services, but in some mindset of less value than client level services are. And I would nearly argue that with many listings that I've represented, if I've had to take an unrepresented buyer through to closing, it's tremendous more work than if I had just had a buyer agent involved, or if I had that customer and took them to another property and sold them that. There's a workload involved in that part of the transaction. This is your opportunity to disclose that, and agree, not just disclose, but to agree with your client as the party to this fee. This is where you do that. Now, the question I keep getting and the confusion I keep getting is, why did the Forms Committee not have a section for the listing agents, buyers that are under buyer agency agreement? Why did we not have the seller agree to buyer agency fees up front? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that's part of the confusion, is that
it really is.
What I say on the hotline is, when your broker has a written agreement with a buyer, either a buyer agency agreement 130, 135, or a transaction brokerage agreement 136, because of the settlement, that's going to have the amount of money your broker's making on that side. So there's no reason to have it in here. And so unrepresented buyers don't fit into any of those pigeonholes, because if you've got a transaction brokerage agreement with the buyer, it says I'm getting paid X. If you got a 130 or 135 with a buyer client, it's going to say the brokerage get paid X. And so this is that buyer that, like you said, they come in off your sign or an open house, or you're advertising somehow. They don't have a cooperative brokerage. They're not working with your brokerage under a written agreement. They're truly just this person that came in off the streets and wants to buy. I think that may be what's confusing folks.
Yeah, and I think, members, licensees need to know that they still get a meaningful discussion on agency. You've got to give them the buyer beware of limited confidentiality. You're an unrepresented buyer that's coming to look at my listing. As a licensed real estate professional representing this home, I still owe you the duty of limited confidentiality. And how long is limited confidentiality like I said, Wu-Tang forever. You keep limited confidentiality forever, but I would prefer you not let anything confidential come my way as I am showing you this home. Now, there are different levels of service that are offered in the state of South Carolina. Our firm offers this, this, and this. If they choose to remain in customer status, then you're covered for the work you're doing, your compensation for that work. You're covered for that in Section 6. If they slide into client situation, then you're looking at dual agency. While this agreement on page 1 has them consenting to consider dual agency, they're considering it. It does not put them you would not be able to put them automatically into dual agency. This was a very good tool of this listing agreement to be able to disclose and agree upon this fee up front for a seller. It gives you a tool to be compensated for your work and meet the needs of the seller, which is to bring a successful buyer to the transaction to close and sell that house. So this is a great little portion here. When I am presenting page 2, which is, all about the money, when I'm talking about my fee for service as a listing agent, I do not utilize an administrative fee, but if I did, that's where I would put it. When I'm talking about the unrepresented buyer fee, this is where I'm able to, again, drill back on agency here. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, our fee for listing services is X. Understand that in the marketing of your property, that if I were to bring you a buyer or an unrepresented buyer, or one of my firm members, one of the other members of my of Lake Kiwi Real Estate, or my broker in charge were to bring you someone, the fee for service you can expect, and I know this from my office policy, is X. I know that and disclose it up front. This is what my office policy says I work for. Now, Mr. Seller, I can't speak to what other firms are charging for their services for buyer agency. I can only give you ranges and predictions based on my long experience in the marketplace here that you can plan for and expect anywhere from X, less than X, or more than X. And we consider that in the list price. But no, for me, as your representation, this is the situation where anybody from my firm, any of these people were to bring us an offer, I can tell you right now what their contractually obligated fee is for service, and it's X. And it's important to say contractually obligated fee. Mr. Seller, we are going to negotiate and we're going to find you the best, most appropriate net, but at no point do you have the option to dictate to that buyer what the agreement should be between that buyer and their representation. At no point can you renegotiate that contract that they are in, this four-wall contract over here. You have no ability to renegotiate that between those two parties because you are not party to this contract. It was agreed upon before they ever came to us, before we were ever listed probably, before they ever had any considerations for your home. That buyer and their agent made that agreement together. You don't have the ability to rework that agreement. And we should not, and I will not, as a licensed competent professional, leverage our positioning to force them to renegotiate. That could be considered torturous interference of a contract, and I will not put myself professionally in that position. But what I will guarantee to you is that we're always going to look out for your best interest. Your best interest may be allowing for the fee for service to be covered through the proceeds they bring to the table. Your best interest may be for taking a contract price that allows for that fee for service to be built into the proceeds so that you get the correct seller net proceeds. That's my commitment to you, and I commit that I will also use every tool in my toolbox of negotiation to get you those most preferable terms, that we are countering with the purchase price in a way that gets you that net number and includes everybody's obligations. This is not point of sale retail where you show up with money and the house goes out. It is a puzzle piece that has to be put together with using limited strings attached funding to make all things work. And a successful transaction can be made if we have all those considerations in mind so that you're prepared to make the best decision for the check to show up at the end. Because at no point, Mr. Seller, unless you have a very outstanding mortgage or have to bring money to the table to close it, at no point are you going to dip into your bank account to pay me. You need those seller proceeds to do it. At no point are you going to have to dip into your bank account to pay that buyer agent. The buyer's money pays everybody's obligations, including the purchase of your home and any other outstanding obligations that you may have. It's important for you to understand that so that you may have your best outcome in this transaction. People will usually, generally, always do what they believe to be in their best interest. You, as the licensed competent professional, it's your duty to explain what is in their best interest and why, and help them understand why buyer agency fees may be in their best interest. It's only one amount of money that's going to cash out, and it's net.
Yeah, great answer. Yeah. The other thing I say on Section 6 is because people have different business models.
Sure.
Someone say, look, hey, Byron, I've already included it up top and it's fine. I say, that's fine, put zeros in here.
Sure.
And the top of page 3 goes to exactly what you were just talking about, the buyer broker compensation. So if a seller says, hey, Reah, I want you to pay another broker. I don't want to deal with all this negotiation. You can say, look, under 7, I can't do that. We're completely decoupled now. The listing broker is not authorized to compensate any other buyer broker.
Right.
The owner can choose to directly negotiate compensation with the buyer broker using Form 120. Or can instead choose directly to negotiate the transaction cost. One thing we get pushback on here, Reah, when it says directly, that they think directly means I'm the buyer agent. I can just call the listed seller up. So we have to say, look,
still under exclusive.
Yeah,
you
still
still
got
have an
ethics and
exclusive.
license law.
Ethics prevail, license law prevails. You're still going to work through your representation. Each party will. That doesn't change anything. What we've got to get good at communicating with each other what the obligations are of each party in the transaction. If you've watched the buyer agency video, you hear me describe calling a listing agent and explaining to them that I'm going to send you an offer and I'm going to send you a 120 and my fee for service on that 120 will be X. And I appreciate that you negotiate using favorable terms, including contract price, in the best interest of your seller, back to me without renegotiating this fee that's contractually obligated by my buyer. That having those conversations with one another as listing agents, the other side of that is having that back to a buyer agent. If you have buyer agents, you've got a house listed or a piece of property listed, and buyer agents are calling you and they're nervous and they're scared and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to speak their fees. They want to know, have you considered a buyer agency fee? And if so, how much is it? And will you tell me? I have a suspicion that agents may or may not be doing that. You owe a duty of confidentiality to your seller. It may be in your seller's best interest that you not disclose what they're willing to set aside for buyer agency fees for service. You may be in a situation with a listing that you're trying to incentivize buyers to come to it, and your seller in writing puts that you wish that you compel them to advertise that you're willing to have fees for services up to X, more than X, less than X, whatever it may be. That's a marketing tool. You never have an agreement on a fee until a 120 is signed. Everything else is just offers. Since August of 2024, it's just offers. Until you have party agreement on it, you do not have a fee agreed. So as a listing agent, the conversations you have to buyer agents that maybe this is new to them or they're very accustomed to broker and it's the old way. The conversations that you have is, I encourage you, Mr. Buyer Agent, number 1, to bring your buyer to my property and write me an offer. Number 2, I encourage you to put on the 120 compensation agreement, whatever the fee for service is that you have agreed upon with your buyer, whatever that fee amount is, percentage or flat fee, put that on the 120 and send it with your offer. And don't forget to check Section 26, the checkbox. Send that to me, and my guarantee to you, as professional to professional, is to help my seller understand that you're in a contractual position, that your buyer has contractually agreed to this rate of compensation. If we have an acceptable offer, wonderful, let's go to the closing table. Let's get our due diligence done and sail off into the sunset. But if we need to counter to make the terms work for my seller, I intend to counter you using purchase price other terms of the contract that work for our most appropriate net. And I will not, I'm telling you now, I will use those tools before I go after any idea of coming apart with the agreement that you've made with your buyer. Understand that the ones that represent those bringing the money are the buyer agents. So if we are not able to get them to the table, then you've not sold the home. They've not met their goal. So you've got to put these puzzle pieces together, help your buyer agents feel comfortable. Whatever, and what my concern is they have not set their fee for service yet. They've not even got that far down the road where they have a buyer agency agreement. They don't know what to do, and they're waiting for someone to tell them. Get out of that mentality. Your value is X. Speak to it. Let your buyer agree with you on what that value is, and then send it off with the offer. And then as a listing agent, advise your seller clients on exactly what that situation is that I just described. They've already made a decision together. It works at this number or it doesn't. I get this question a lot. We've got everything worked out but the commission. No, you don't. You don't have everything worked out. If we're negotiating with these pieces in mind, why were you not negotiating a contract price that helped meet the net of your seller, that helped that buyer be able to cover the fees for service that are required for them to make this purchase? That's a requirement for them to make the purchase. Why did you not negotiate with those facts in mind? It was in the best interest of your seller to do so. But instead, you left a position where we're still far apart. You've got to negotiate from the list side with the net in mind. Buyers, you've got to set your buyer agency agreement, rates of fees for service up front. You can't figure it out midway through the deal. It doesn't work that way. Listing agents need to quit acting like that this listing agreement was written by Moses in a stone tablet and was never going to be changed, and treating buyer agents like their buyer agency agreement was written in pencil and can be erased. They are both written in gold ink. They're contractually obligated, two to make it, two to break it. The buyer can't unilaterally decide I'm going to pay less for this service that I've already agreed to pay at X. They've got to have access to these funds to do so. The buyer agent has to also agree to reduce their rate, just like if we get stuck, Mr. Seller, and I have to agree to work for less money if we are negotiating that way. It doesn't work for us to undo one another's agency agreements. We have to respect where they are, respect what they are in their holistic forms, and find the way that those puzzle pieces come together to make the real estate purchase. That make sense?
Yeah, Reah, one thing we get on the hotline, I think, buyer agents are worried about getting paid when all these big changes came about with the settlement, the forms changes. What they'll do incorrectly, they'll send a 120 attached to the contract offer at X%, and they're so worried about getting paid, they'll also try to put their X% into the Section 6 of the 310 under seller paid buyer transaction costs, and they can't double dip, in other words.
They're confused, and they're, like you said, they're worried about their compensation being covered. We talked about the Diana Brothers 4 walls of the contract. When you are utilizing Section 26 of the 310 and checkboxing 120 compensation agreement, you check that box, you attach that 120. That 120 just entered the 4 walls of the contract. It's a part of the contract. I've negotiated multiple deals over the last 8-9 months where I'm representing buyers. And the listing agent, I will send them a really good offer, really nice offer, one that should be workable and doable. They'll call me up and they'll say, "You good with just doing this verbally?" "No, I'm not. Put it on paper." "No, I'm not. Put it on paper." "Are you good with negotiating this verbally?" They put it on paper instead, and they say, "We like everything about your offer, all the terms except the contract price, and our contract counter price is X." And so when I receive this written 310 counter offer, I go through and look to see that they did what they said they were going to do, that the contract price is now, whatever it is, we'll say $400,000, and that term is the same, that term is the same. Yep, everything's good, everything's good. Last page, they've taken the fee for service that I've put that's contractually obligated by my buyer on the 120 and struck through it and wrote a new one. Now I have a contractual obligation between my buyer and me for that rate of fee for service. That listing agent said, we like all of your terms except price. You do not like all of my terms if there is an issue with the amount that that seller will net due to my fee for service. If, and this has happened multiple times, if that listing agent had simply countered a contract price that would have covered the term they marked out, we would have an agreement right then. But instead, what do we have? We have an awkward situation. We have my buyer going, why won't they let me use my money to pay you? Where will I find money to now pay you? What do we, and a lot of times if it's been right at list price, they didn't list in the correct listing price to cover that fee for service, the potential of ever paying any fee for service, and they shortchanged themselves on the listing. We've got a problem that we've now got to put together that would never existed if that listing agent had, number one, read the entirety of the contract, explained to their seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this buyer agent is working at a fee for X that's contractually obligated by that buyer to their representation to bring them through the closing. It is in your best interest that you allow them to pay their representation. A represented buyer is going to come to you 88% of the time and be more likely to perform, less likely to sue you because they have their own advocate in this situation. It's in your best interest to consider this. And as a result, I recommend that we counter at contract price of X so that we meet the net proceeds that you want to take to the bank at Y with the situations, the terms of this contract. That is the struggle that I have seen in the last handful of months. And a lot of that existed because of broker-to-broker compensation. The seller did make an agreement of an offer of X that would be the consideration for buyer agency contract. I don't know in what world after broker-to-broker went away, or after, I'm sorry, the MLS disclosure of what the compensation would be, the guaranteed cooperative compensation, after it went away, I don't know why we ever as listing agents thought we would tell another licensed competent professional in the transaction what they're worth. You don't know what they're worth. You don't know what their firm charges. You don't know what their fees for service is. And more importantly, you have no idea what the scope of service is in their buyer agency agreement. You don't know that that buyer agent hasn't set up an agreement that they have been working with them for, 2-3 years trying to buy this home, and they have set the fee commensurate on that. You don't know if the buyer agent has set aside some amount of money to help the buyer with some level of assistance in the purchase. I've set aside this amount of money for you to have a moving van, Mr. Buyer, when it's time to make the purchase, and I'm going to include that as part of my fee for service with you. You don't know what their scope is, and just in the same breath, buyer agents don't know what the listing agent is doing. There is no standard fee for service, and there never has been. So if you're a buyer agent looking at what a listing agent is making, you don't know that me, as the listing agent that listed that lot, spent money hiring a backhoe driver to dig test holes for a septic system permit that I took at my own cost. You don't know that I hired an underbrush company to come out and clear the lot. You don't know because you don't know my scope of service, and it ain't none of your business. What I've said is a fee for service between the buyer, or the seller that I represent, or the buyer that I represent in the transaction, because you are not party to it. And so when we're advising in what is the best interest of the client in the situation, for a seller, we don't know. It's contractually obligated. We negotiate for the net, and that's the direction we take. I got off on a little tangent here, I know I did, but we were talking about seller concessions and how they're duplicating that. Don't do that. Don't duplicate. You either go 120 or you ask for it in concessions. The cleaner, simpler, less math, and we're talking 3rd and 4th grade math. This isn't hard math to figure out. The more simple way to do is to utilize a 120 and secure that part of the negotiation up front, because you have a contractual obligation to that fee. If there is some need to utilize The concession, just asking for it straight up in concessions, that's an option to do so in Section 6 transaction cost. But you don't do both unless there's some gap between what the 120 comp agreement says and what you're owed for fee for service, and you're still trying to pull that from the proceeds that the buyer is bringing to the table. The concession field is so complicated, right? Because it also covers other concessions. Like, what are some of the concessions that you can think of off the top of your head that sellers make for buyers?
Yeah, it's every upfront cost. It's insurance, lenders,
Right.
lawyers, inspectors, surveyors, the kitchen sink, everything that you would pay up front. It's a way to basically finance it into the loan is what at the end of the day, what it turns into.
So it's not that it's wrong to put buyer agency fees for service in that concessions. In fact, there is an acknowledgement there in the Section 6 training, where this is not a contracts class, a purchase agreement class, but in Section 6, you do have the option to check off this is 100% for buyer agency fees, so long as concessions were not advertised in the MLS per the settlement, or this is the buyer agency fees plus, X $1,000 for hardwood floor replacement, plus X $100 to pay down points, whatever it may be.
Exactly.
The cleaner, simple, easier thing to do is to put it in the 120, work it into the deal that way, negotiate for the net listing agents, and go from there. Otherwise, we're doing more math than a lot of y'all want to do.
Yeah, well said. And then earnest money, a lot of times the attorneys are holding the earnest money now, and it just basically puts the seller on notice, hey, that money's going to be held in trust until the parties mediate or sign a disbursement or they get a court order.
If I can take a point of privilege, as we've got a real estate commissioner that's listening in the background that sent us a nasty text message through our company text, everybody involved in the transaction has to get proof of that earnest money deposit. Both parties. If you are a licensee involved in the transaction, earnest money is your obligation. I don't care who you represent. You better have proof of it. It better be in your file for every single file that you have, every single contract that you have. Other people's money is the fastest way to end up in big type of trouble.
Yeah, good point, because in the hotline we've gotten calls where it went to the attorney and they just assumed it went there. Never assume, always check.
Assuming we know what the acronym stands for, so don't do that.
10 is signage. That can vary. Some owners associations have restrictions on signage, but this outlines under the listing about the broker decides how to display the signs. We've got broker liability limitation language. Basically, unless you're doing gross negligence, you're only liable for your compensation amount.
Yep, that's a good member protection there, that the number 12, broker's duty. And we also have that in the buyer agency agreement. A lot of this is some of the duplication there.
And then 12 and 13 is basically the agreement, saying what the broker is going to do for their money and then what the owner is going to do.
And it's important to note, as a member benefit, this form is a member benefit. This number, Section 12, broker's duty, and this is pretty much straight out of license law. What license law says that you will have in a listing agreement as your duties to a seller to represent them in this transaction. This is what you will do, and it's your opportunity to explain that to the seller agent, or the seller in the transaction. That way they don't think you're also doing odd other things like blowing leaves every Friday because they fall, and that makes her listing look bad. It's your chance to set the expectations.
Yeah, definitely read that, understand what you're agreeing to do for the seller, and then it talks about this is the way you control the seller to make sure the seller does what you need them to do to get the transaction smoothly closed.
It's required that we both perform in this transaction, Mr. Seller. Part of that is making your home available and making it look as good as possible, and that's completely disclosed to you right here in this form.
Yeah, so we're speeding through it, but read through it and go through it when you're going through the listing with the seller and say, this is under this agreement, this is what you're going to do to make this deal close. 14 is the seller disclosure. So the realtors lobbied to get this residential property condition disclosure statement. It protects the seller and all the real estate licensees, because the buyer fills out to the best of their knowledge a whole range of questions about the property. And if that's filled out, unless the real estate licensees know there's false answers on there, they can't be successfully sued. So it's a good liability shield. And if the seller fills it out correctly, they can't be sued for non-disclosure because they disclosed. And it's big ticket items that usually here on the hotline, the air conditioner breaks the day after closing, mold, termites, roof, water dam, any of the big ticket items. That's what's going to create a trial lawyer situation. And this is designed to protect that. It's got some more liability limitations in here. Because what was happening before this, Reah, was post-closing, something's wrong with the property, the buyer hires a trial lawyer and they sue everybody.
Yes.
Inspectors, realtors, sellers, and the realtors aren't licensed or trained in inspections or property conditions, so it was unfair for them to be pulled into these lawsuits. So this is a way to try to help.
This is great protection and liability limitation.
And then 15, lien disclosure. It enables you to basically disclose any liens on the property. And we've started to get a handful of short sale calls on the hotline, which is surprising to me.
Well, and there are a number of closing attorneys out there that offer a pre-listing title search. So you can go ahead and know, and it becomes a marketability piece for your property. Hey, we've already had a title search. I can show you the title is free and clear of these, of defects. You'll still have to get one, Mr. Buyer, before you close on the home. But there's a lot of closing attorneys in the state that will offer that. So,
oh wow!
It's an interesting new offering. I guess the closing attorneys are getting competitive with each other and really wanting their business. So
yeah, that's a great service. And then 16 talks about taxes. It basically saying, especially in your area where you've got out of state or maybe people from other countries, it basically says if you make a profit on your sale of your house, you're going to pay your income taxes to IRS or South Carolina Department of Revenue, and then it covers rollback taxes if there was any, which are mainly on land, probably more so than a residential property. 17 is really if you're on the beachfront. There's some laws where if in 1988, they basically made a demarcation line. If you're built, seaward of that line and a storm tears down whatever was grandfathered in, you may or may not be able to rebuild. So you have to disclose that to a buyer so they don't buy something, storm comes in, they find out they can't rebuild. That's going to be a lawsuit. So that's done by surveys. But if you're not on the beach, it's not really applicable to you. And then 18 goes into multiple listing services.
This is always a dicey point, and we talked about it earlier about listing your public marketing, that being option 1 to get this into the MLS and publicly marketed, and then you've got option 2 where it does not go in the MLS and it's office exclusive essentially, and it reads just that: owner does not consent for their property to be placed in the multiple listing service and instead wishes to have their property listed as a brokerage exclusive. I can tell you that's a hot topic among regulatory bodies across the nation, different real estate commissions. In fact, we're getting ready to go to the Association of Real Estate License Law Officials Conference, and I hope to hear a little bit more about the idea of private networks and office exclusive listings. What I will say about this is if it is exclusive, it is exclusive to your office. Again, you're in your office being your hand. It doesn't mean exclusive and. Exclusive is all holistic. Whatever the rules are of your MLS are what you're going to follow in this position.
Yeah, definitely check your MLS because NAR doesn't want to get sued again, so they've changed some of the rules that give you a little bit more flexibility. But the main thing is transparency. Let the owner know the pros and cons of office exclusive versus full market exposure. There's some sellers that for various reasons will choose one or the other, so transparency.
Exactly, and I would imagine that any seller that comes to you and says, I want the highest and best outcome of my property, I want to net the most proceeds. I went to the University of South Carolina and my advisor said, you better go home to your tech school for econ because it's going to be real hard here and you're not going to do well. So I went and took econ at Tech, but I still learned supply and demand and the idea that the more eyes that are on something for sale, the higher the value becomes and the more opportunity you have at actually selling that property. So if you're going to hold back that information, if you're going to hold that listing off the open marketplace that we all participate in on the MLS, if you're going to keep it a secret, and then your seller client is dissatisfied with the way the transaction went and they go to the real estate commission and say, I am dissatisfied and I have been damaged. If you stand in front of the real estate commission and are able to verbalize why it was in their best interest for nobody but your office to know about it, that's the reality of what you'll be looking at. There are sellers out there that trust in you blindly, that they trust that you always have their best interest at heart, and you should, that is compelled to you of your fiduciary obligations, that you have their best interest. So if in some way, shape, or form holding that property off market from every potential buyer was in their best interest, you better be able to verbalize why. And if there are other properties in the immediate area that are selling for significantly more than your office exclusive, you don't have a defensible position. In fact, you have a provable damages situation in many cases if they were advised never to take it to market. That's the way the American dream of home ownership has been facilitated quite well, is through the multiple listing service, and all folks having equal access to this type of information. We're the envy of other countries in the way our real estate market works. This works well, and if you are doing it differently, understand your duty is to your client and their best interest. So if you've done this off market, why was that in their best interest to do so?
Yeah, this is definitely, if you're reading real estate news, a definitely fast evolving
topic. It's
a
hot topic, even as of yesterday.
And talk to your broker in charge. Best answer we can give today, I think. Make sure that you're following your broker policy on all these issues. But 19's lock boxes. Lock boxes are a good thing for security reasons and tracking and providing convenient access to properties. What do you talk to sellers when you talk about lock boxes?
Well, our MLS utilizes the super lockbox system, and I explain to them the security behind the lockbox system, that we need to know who's entering your home and that they're legit to be there, and that our affiliate members of our association also have lock boxes. So when an inspector needs to come in, or like a CL 100 like I did yesterday, they were able to come in and open that box, that this is a security measure for them. If you're a licensee that's just throwing lock boxes on willy-nilly, coded boxes, whatever, you need to check the rules of your MLS if that's allowed or not.
Yeah, well said. 20, 21, 22, that's kind of some legal stuff there, just basically controlling what happens once you're under contract, basically saying there's, the settlement language, commissions, compensation are not set by law, they're negotiable. Maintenance 23 basically says that the seller is going to maintain the property. That way, if the seller didn't do it, they're in breach of the listing agreement, because it makes it harder to sell if they're not keeping up with the property. And then 24 basically says when you get an acceptable offer, you're gonna sign it and enter a written agreement. 25, lead-based paint. This has become a hot topic because we had a realtor in the upstate with some significant fines. We've been working with the EPA, because what happened was on and this is target property, pre-1978 lead paint. Kids eat the lead and it hurts their brains. But on the EPA form, in my opinion, it was for sale by owner, because it said if the buyer agent's getting paid, they have to notify the seller of the lead issues. We've been in touch with NAR and EPA saying, look, under this new firm to firm going away, the seller is often going to be paying the buyer brokerage. EPA didn't want to change their form. So the best thing we got now is email the listing brokers, say, hey, this is a pre-1978 house. You need to make sure that your owner knows about lead paint. Keep that in your file, and then get that lead disclosure signed by everybody. Make sure you got it in your file. You've got a lead paint disclosure signed by the seller and by the buyer.
That's kind of the most common thing I see with listings pre-1978. Listing agents need to get that disclosure signed at the point of signing this document, and then put that disclosure into the supplements, attachments, whatever your document portal is within your MLS platform, because the buyers need to have that before they make the offer. It doesn't need to be you've gone pending, went under contract, and finally a compliance person within one of the two firms says, hey, this needed a lead-based paint document and y'all didn't produce it. Well, that should have been done up front. Just like with the Vacation Rental Act, that addendum has to be presented up front, and oftentimes it's not.
Those are good ideas, using the MLS to communicate that. I like that. Mediation, we offer mediation as a member service, try to help people avoid lawsuits. Fair housing, this basically says that the owner is going to follow fair housing as well as the broker. So this is good, because if an owner discriminates, you can get sued. So you don't want that happening.
Correct. Fair housing applies to all. It is not just for the licensed professionals in the transaction. All Americans abide by fair housing. And so it's your duty to explain that to a seller.
Yeah, well said. We've got Fair Housing Month. Stay tuned for more information on that. 28, digital communicate. We live in an electronic world, so this is talking about electronic transmissions. It talks about how enforcement, you know, if it's a breach, you can sue for damage and attorney's fees. Sex offender, we put this in the seller because one time I usually think about the buyer, but one time I had a hotline call where the seller was selling the house. They owned two houses next door to each other. They were selling one and they sold it to a sex offender and they wanted to try to sue the broker about, because they didn't disclose it was a sex offender and they were going to have to live next to him. But this says, hey, you need, the brokers aren't checking this information for risk management reasons, but if it's important to you, seller or buyer, here's how you can check it with the Sheriff's Service South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Photography, this basically gives us the rights because when you're marketing, probably you're taking pictures, video, drones. The owner is basically giving you rights to those images. And that's come up because even post-closing, we've had people say, oh, take those down. Well, this says that you own the rights to those and you don't have to take them down.
Well, and if you do take them down, I understand the expectation of privacy that many buyers want in their home, but when you pull that information off, you make it extremely challenging for appraisers to gain the information they need to accurately appraise other homes in the area. The multiple listing system works well as a data portal for all of us in the real estate professional dome here to understand values beyond what just the tax records give us. This is a good way to have that information at our fingertips. So if we are removing those pictures, and a lot of times, for me, I've represented a buyer, and the buyer has asked, well, I don't own those pictures, the listing agent, and I give them that entire same thing that for appraisal purposes, we prefer they stay, and it will ultimately come up to the listing agent to decide if they're going to pull those off.
Yeah, well said. Once it's on the internet, it's hard to get
yeah,
it off the internet.
It's everything's being collected by AI somewhere. So
exactly. And then surveillance. The law is always trailing technology. So now we got microphones and cameras. Don't put cameras in the restrooms of your house because that's an expectation of privacy. And even microphones have some risk because you might get charged under eavesdropping laws or wiretapping, which sounds antiquated, but those laws are out there. So the best thing to do, cameras not in the restrooms and turn the mics off. But this protects the realtor in case the seller was listening in. You would say basically, hey, they breached the agreement. You know, if the law enforcement wants to arrest somebody, they can go arrest them.
And I advise my seller, everywhere you go, everybody's got a camera. I got cameras at my property as well. I advise every seller, don't listen in on those conversations. You're only going to make yourself crazy. Number one, you don't really have any context for what they're talking about. You know, check your ring cam, see if they've come and gone so you know when it's time to go home. But there is an expectation of confidentiality that a buyer is going to want to have. And if you want them to buy your home, you want them to come feeling confident to make you that offer. You don't really know, you're opening yourself up to a little bit of liability if you're sitting there surveilling people at a high level in your home. Let them make your house available to be seen. Let them see it. Lock up your valuables always. Don't leave, you know, your Tiffany necklace out on the side of the bed. Just put your things away and prepare for showings in the best way that you can, and don't nitpick the experience because it's going to make it harder for you in the negotiation.
Yeah, well said. We've got hotline calls about stuff, you know, allegedly pilfered. You don't know who took it. All that stuff, weapons, drugs, valuables, sentimental items, lock them up.
Make the bed and lower the commode lid, folks. It's not complicated.
Then it talks about more legalese to amend it, you know, like you say, 2 to make it, 2 to break it with writing. Brings up fraud because we still got wire fraud going out there. Sellers could be a big target for wire fraud. So
and that's the wire fraud disclosure is the form that falls right behind this in my stack of listing documents that I'm going to execute. So I could not take more opportunity to talk about wire fraud with buyers and seller, clients and customers of real estate transactions. They need to know it's everywhere, and it does not hurt you to disclose it. In fact, I've probably even scared plenty of buyers. They're like, "Now I don't want to even open an email from you." I'm like, well, give them the realities of it, but help them understand. Don't just go wiring money wherever. You've got to confirm that stuff.
Well said. And then other terms, make sure your broker in charge, brokerage attorney or hotline are approving any language. Don't write phrases or sentences in there because somebody's going to accuse you of unauthorized practice of law. And we don't want that. And then basically some legalese on the last page before they sign basically says, hey, I own the property. I have authority to sign this document. I understand it. I've gotten a copy of my agreements, copy of the real estate brokerage relationship form. Sign it, date, time, email, and phone for contact information. They're initialing the bottom of each page that they read it. And then it's got our thing to make sure only realtors are using the form. The vendors are auto-populating with whoever created this form. And then, Reah, if people want to learn more about this from your classes, what are some ways they can get in touch with you?
CE season is in full swing, and I've got some CE offerings coming up, and I do have some basic forms course offerings coming up as well. If the members benefited from hearing my personal discussion, we'll use the word scripting, around speaking to buyers and sellers in the transaction, that's what you're always going to get in my classroom, is that my scripting. When I say scripting, I don't write nothing down. It never comes out of my mouth the same way twice. The only thing I ask is that the attendees of my class try and absorb what I'm saying and form it into their own authentic telling to their clients, their buyers and sellers, so that they understand and trust what you're saying. If you're just reading off a script, it doesn't work well for building trust. Find your unique voice. If you want to learn more, I've got a number of upcoming classes heavily in the month of April. On April 1st, I've got a in-person course in Oconee County, right in my backyard. I started with us. I want the folks that I transact with to be brushed up on everything, and I'm hosting a class on April Fool's Day called Fooling with Forms. And that doesn't mean you're a fool if you come. It means you're smart for getting educated on these forms changes. You'll get a little more in-depth scripting than you got with me today. I will give you a little bit more on the way I'm discussing this. So that's on April the 1st, April Fool's Day in Oconee County, right there at Lake Huey. The information to sign up will be in the chat. I will also be looking to I'll be at the Greater Greenwood Association, the Greenwood Realtors Association, on April the 8th. I'm looking to put that same forms class together, and I've about ironed out the details on April 20th. And then the last three dates I have are through my local association, the Western Upstate Association of Realtors, on 4/22, on May 19th, and on the drop dead date, the last day to get this stuff done, which is June 30th, to get your 10 hours. And those are 3 full days of coursework where you will get the South Carolina mandated core course, which is legal hot tips, for 4 hours in the morning. You'll get 2 hours in the afternoon of a new course that I wrote specifically for this listing agreement and this type of transaction, which is called Strategies for Seller Direct Transactions. That's a 2-hour elective course in the afternoon. We'll get you the sign-ups on all of that. And then at some point in time, we haven't nailed out the date, but I'm coming to great old Cherokee. I'll be in Gaffney teaching those members. So there's a lot of opportunity in the upstate of South Carolina through these realtor associations to come and learn from me. Some just additional opportunities that I've offered just to get folks educated. And I've had a number of different firms that I'm doing firm-based instruction just for their brokerage on what the needs are around forms or license law. So I'm available to come to your brokerage and facilitate some trainings for licensees that may need it. I'm very fluent in license law. I'm fluent in ethics, and I am fluent in this settlement agreement, where probably more than any other realtor member I know. Those are the wheelhouses that I do well. I can teach you how to transact in this current environment with all the rule books that you have to follow. I can teach you how to practice safely and stay out of trouble.
Super. And if they need to get in touch with you, what's the best ways they can contact you?
I'll drop my digital business card in the comments, but I'm easily discovered on Google through my firm at Lake Huey Real Estate, through Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all of that. I can be contacted by phone, 864-710-9547. And the one that I respond to least is Facebook Messenger. I have like a bunch of Facebook messages, but send me a message if you need me. I'm glad to reach out and help.
Thank you, Reah. And thanks, Michael Christ and Tyler Tempton in production. They're going to be editing this thing and making it look pretty for us. Thank you again, Reah. If you have any questions, contact the legal hotline, 803-772-5206. Have a good day. Bye.